Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. In today's video I will be making a hexagonal or hexagons that look more like a honeycomb, as the better known term for the DIY honeycomb pallet wall art, as you may have seen on Pinterest and a few different sites looking at pallet inspirationals. I myself have been inspired by this, but it seems a little daunting at times to get into miters. This is something that's actually a lot more simplistic than I was expecting it to be. And it's pretty basic once you go through it. It's just kind of getting down the basic degree. So the degree that we will be using on a chop saw, or if you have a little miter box that you'll be using for a hand saw, that will also work to make the miters that you need in this. There's a couple different other little techniques you can use if you trust your hand at just making a straight line, using either like a protractor or anything like that. You can get this project done yourself. So don't feel it is too daunting. I myself thought it was kind of daunting at first, just every now and again me and miters don't always get along, but this is pretty straightforward and pretty easy. So without further ado, let's get to making it. All I have that I'm going to be using today is some angled. All I did was make some 90-degree cuts on the ends to make a straight board, and then I've just gone through and done some light sanding with just sandpaper on it. So this isn't going to be super intensive, you don't need a lot of equipment for it, but let's get to it. Alright, to kind of show everyone that may have a miter saw or just are trying to figure out exactly what you need to do, what I will be doing is changing the direction of the blade from a flat 90 or a 0, and I'm dropping it down. So instead of making the miter cut, which will be this direction, a bevel cut will be beveling the wood. So in this setup, I'll be making a cut this direction on the wood rather than making a cut this direction on the wood, if that makes a little bit more sense. So instead of going at an angle one way or the other, I'll be taking and going at that angle from the thickness of the wood, as known as a bevel cut, rather than a miter cut. Just for those who may not know exactly what's going on in that regard. So if you have a chop saw but don't kind of know the basics of the chop saw, on the back here, most of these will have an adjustment, whether it's a screw or in my instance it's a turn. And then you look for your indicator here. We're going to want to put this to 30 degrees. So I'll kind of turn it a little bit here so you can see. So at a 30-degree cut, the chop saw will now come down at an angle. Kind of turn this a little bit so you can see here. So the saw is going to come down at an angle, but I am not changing my miter at all. It's going to be remaining as a straight line. Just for those of you that don't quite understand the differences between a bevel versus a miter, that's just kind of a little quick catch you up. Alright, so to catch you up, what I did is I just cut a 30-degree cut on one side. I turned the work around. So after I made, in this instance here, I'm cutting downward to the right. I made my cut, rotated my piece to have all the rest of the stock on this side. I'm measuring what I want the interior of each of these to be, which is 6 inches from this point to here. And the actual length of the additional piece of wood, measuring on the back of that, adds on per side, so it is 3/8. So for your piece here, this can be used as a template to make the additional 5 sides, so 6 total to be the finished hexagon. So I'm going to use this as a template. There's a little bit of a zigzag from this knot in the wood, but I think I might cut an additional piece for mine and use it as the template, but you can go through making the template exact to how you like it, and then just use that as the finishing template to be exact to all the additional 5. And as long as whatever dimension you choose on the inside here and the outside matches 6 times over, then you'll make a perfect hexagon. So just make sure that they all match and that there isn't any variation, or that your cut line is going off in one direction, and that is how you'll make a perfect hexagon. So without further ado, I'm going to make the additional 5 right quick. Alright, so for the next bit, I'm going to be using my kind of tried and true method of the glue on the joints, as well as I'm going to be using pin nails. Now, my preferred method in this is to use a smaller pin nail, so I know if I mess up, I don't have as much potential to pin nail my own thumb, but I also don't have as much I have to clean up or go through with snips afterwards and sand down. You can use a longer pin nail. The reason I'm going to be going with smaller is for this joint, and with how thick the boards are, what I can do with this smaller pin nail is, even if I was to go straight down into the piece and it was to kind of peek out a little bit, I can hammer that back, or I can cut off the end pretty easily. Otherwise, what I'll probably do is just go real close to the edge and go straight down. That'll give me my best ability to get through both pieces of material and hold till the glue can do its job. I will also be going back and forth, doing at least 2 on one side, maybe 2 or 3 on the other side, going the opposite direction, pretty close to the edge, and that'll kind of add a symmetry and look for it. So if you do see a shiny kind of chrome pin nail sticking out, it at least kind of has somewhat of a pattern to it. As well, if you were to be using this more for the glue strength and just a couple pin nails, you can go with the longer ones. These are 3/4 inch. You can go up to 1 inch or 1.5 inches, 1 1/4 or 1 1/8 inch. They also offer, and you can go at an angle on the board that you're pin nailing through to line up with the line of the other one you're going into. So in this instance here, if I wanted to pin nail through this board, I would line up to where I'm straight with the board below it, and that would give me the best ability to get the most meat and potatoes kind of going through the next board without splitting or it going out. The reason I'm kind of going with something a little lighter is I can get my hands a little closer to it, and I don't have to think as much about where it's going to protrude out. Now, I will still be safe, of course, but that does kind of just add as a safety barrier for myself. And I'm not necessarily looking for the pin nail to do the majority of the strength, I'm looking for the glue to do the majority of the strength. So as long as this has a pretty good bond and pretty good strength between the two joints, that's the main thing I'm looking for. Plus, working with hexagons, it's a little harder to strap them down and hold it perfectly tight if you use a ratchet strap or something like that. you're going to put a little too much pressure on whatever joint is closest to the ratchet, and it's going to pull and buckle it. So using the pin nail method is going to give you the ability to have an immediate fix. Using glue, if there's a little bit of deviation in your pin nail and you get that line, the glue will help fill that line in. So it kind of helps smooth out the imperfections. You can go through a sawdust later, a little bit more glue. If you do have an exposed crack, fill that in with the sawdust that matches up to the wood you used. And then it'll look as pretty seamless as you can get it. And that's just one of the little tricks of the trade. Alrighty, so here you have the 3 hexagons or honeycomb pallet wood project, which have you. And it was a lot more simplistic than I had originally thought. Like I said earlier, I kind of feel that this was one of those projects that I kind of held off on because I haven't always been the best of friends with miters. I have done them in the past, and I have been proficient when multiple times I've taken a lot more time than I had wanted to, and I just took a little bit extra kind of feeling it out. But this project was actually pretty easy. As long as you have that template in that beginning piece and you make everything as identical to that piece as you can, and then you just make 6 and then multiply that by how many you want, it's pretty much done. The only thing that was a little bit odd is that because it's pallet wood, you'll have deviations of width unless you run it through a table saw or something like that, but it actually kind of adds to the motif. In this instance, I used 3 of one board and 3 of another, and I just staggered them, and it added a very nice aesthetic, almost a mild stain, if you will. Now I will say one thing that will be very helpful for you is if you are doing the glue method like I have done, I would suggest that if you desire to stain these beforehand, stain each individual piece. One, that'll help with your joints to be a lot more masked and not be seen as much. Versus if you can't get stain into the joints, then you'll see those very blatantly with a blonde wood and a darker stain. The other thing as well is when you use glue, most glue is not stainable for the wood type of glue or the outdoor glue. So if these would be an outdoor project, just make sure to stain beforehand, then glue, and then you can do a clear coat over it to protect the wood from aging any further. Stain doesn't necessarily protect aging of wood or deterioration of wood. It just colors it. So just be mindful of that. There is some different types of Thompson water seal that has additives to protect it, but a lot of it will still allow natural aging. So just keep that in mind if this is an outdoor project. If it's an interior decorated project of any kind like that, just make sure that you use something that is UV protected if it's going to be near a window. That's another thing you kind of worry about with certain stains, is that they will bleach out in the sun after a while, or you'll get one side that looks a lot lighter than the other that's in the more shadowed part of the day. The thing I also really liked about these is that they are still kind of stackable. So if you did want to have them in viewable area and just have them kind of line up, they can still do that. They can still have that honeycomb effect. The one thing I would suggest that is 2 different things. If you pin nail this and glue this up like I have, I would give it a full 24-hour cure before putting anything heavy in them to begin with or on them. You will cause those joints to flex and move. Don't fully trust the pin nails 100%. Like I said, they're there to help hold until the glue does its job. Otherwise, of course, you can use nails or screws if you want to have this finish right out the gate. I just shy away from nails because I know with how thin these boards are, they usually tend to split unless you pre-drill them. And then at that point, you're kind of questioning how deep do you pre-drill, as well as what size of drill bit do you use versus the nail you have. That kind of ends up being a little bit of a guesswork to know before you split the board, or if it's so loose that you just kind of question if it's even structurally helping at all. Screws are a surefire way to get through it, but same thing, they are very thin, so make sure to pre-drill. If you do choose to use pretty much any screw, will have a tendency to potentially crack any of these boards just for how thin they are. Being as that most of them are 1/2 inch or under 1/2 inch. Once you get done sanding them, or even a lot of times the pallet wood in general is under 1/2 inch for the thickness of the board. So keep that in mind. If you wanted to keep it in this formation, I would suggest just making a little pilot hole and getting some flush screws. Otherwise, another alternative is that you can cut or drill a little hole and throw a dowel rod in them. And then what you can do is just have the dowel rod sticking up or sticking down and have one side solidly glued in for the dowel rod and the other side to recept it. So that way they kind of nest properly. I do 2 dowel rods if you were to do that method to kind of get the same kind of setup. But then you still have that modular capability if you wanted to take them apart, or if you wanted to make these like kind of almost toys for your kids, you can also do that as well. Have some peg systems hooked up onto it and kind of preset so they can stack them and play with them, and still have them as wall art if you wanted them for your kids or for yourself. Dowels, if you make them short enough, you won't notice them, and then that way you can still reconfigure them. If you're someone that likes to change your decorum often, that can be another option while still keeping the aesthetic that you may enjoy, but also being able to reconfigure and change it. If you do screw them or dowel them, there is a couple of different formations, depending on how you want it to look, that are very pleasing to the eye. And very structurally sound as well, depending on what you put in them. So you could even mount it up as such, or you could drop it down and go with something like that, or you could even turn it outside and go something like that, depending on how you want it to look and how you want it to be presented in the end result. That's the thing I actually really like about these, and I can see why people really are kind of drawn to them and excited by them and enjoy playing around with them. If you're to make a fourth one, you could stick it up here, kind of have it be more something that dances across the wall. I just chose to go with 3 to kind of give some examples and to show you how quick the project is. I've never actually made these before. This is my first go at it, and the whole project has taken me about half hour, 40 minutes from beginning to end. Once everything was set up for the filming of it, I pretty much started, had the boards set aside, so as long as you're at that point, it'll take you about a half hour if you have the tools readily available. So kind of keep that in mind. It's not a long project, and it can be faster if you were to use quick fasteners of any kind, such as if you were to use a nail gun versus a pin nailer, or if you were to trust the pin nails and just go longer pin nails, or if you were to use screws from the get-go and then it's just done. You don't have to wait for any of the glue to dry or anything like that. Like I said, for my project, I would wait 24 hours if you do this method before putting anything like candles or any kind of decorations or pictures on them. You can also mount hanging hardware at the back of these. You can run long screws as one of the highly suggested uses that people have, is that they find a stud and they just run 2 long screws into the stud work once they make sure all their joints are nicely glued and set, or screwed and properly strengthened for whatever you're going to put on them. So just little tidbits and things along the way that I was able to figure out on my, just kind of looking it up and looking ahead, seeing exactly which way would be good for them to be built and what way you might like. It is also just kind of fun to play around with them a bit. So thank you all so very much. If you haven't already, be sure and like the video if you do like it. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't as well. That helps me out greatly. It gives you the ability to keep me in your recently viewed folder, and also just to keep me on your list, so that way you know if you like the content, you're able to see what I'm able to come out with next. If you want to get notifications when I do so, make sure and hit that notification bell. That also helps me out. The higher amount of people that actually hit the notification bell and hit the subscribe button, it gives me a lot better ability to be suggested to people who are looking up similar content. So that all helps very much as well. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day and or evening.